platform of WeTransfer, we tell stories about creativity. So we profile emerging artists and established artists from all over the world, and we also commission our own films to be made as well. And we've been partnering with IDFA for a good few years now, and each year we select a film from their roster which has creativity at its centre. And this year we've selected Two Strangers Trying Not to Kill Each Other, and I'm so excited that we have the film's co-director, Jacob Perlmutter, here to answer some questions before we start the film, so please give Jacob a warm welcome. Hi Jacob. We'll get the mic on first.
Hi.
Hello.
There it is.
Hi Alex. Hi everyone.
Hi Jacob. So it's always a bit more tricky doing a Q&A before anyone in the audience has actually seen the film. So I wonder if you could just start by briefly explaining the film to us.
What are you all in for? This is a love story about growing older and really about the meaning of keeping communication going throughout a relationship that has longevity and passion and respect.
And meeting Joel, who's one of the protagonists in the film, came about through a series of sort of quite serendipitous events, didn't it?
Yeah, so this film came about from a chance encounter. I have been working as a photographer for years. I was actually a street photographer, and I was a long-standing fan of Joel's work, and one day on the streets of London, where I wouldn't expect to see Joel Morris, I saw him. And I thought, ooh, I need to say something to him, but I didn't know what to say. So I followed him for a while, in and out of a couple of shops, until I kind of summoned the courage to say something to this, artist hero. And as I was going to approach, I suddenly lost him. And that was that. Also, I thought, a couple of weeks later I saw him again, this time with Maggie. And I thought, wow, I really have to go and say something. So I went and approached the two of them. And when I met Maggie, the way that Joel introduced her and looking at them side by side, this couple seemed to have the most incredible aura about them, which you'll see in this film kind of come alive. And this image of Joel and Maggie standing together went straight into my heart and stayed there for a couple of years, until a couple of years later I came across a blog that Maggie writes about her life, and I connected with the writing deeply, and I got in touch and I said, I met both of you on the street a few years ago, I can't get it out of my mind. How would you feel about the idea of a documentary being made about your relationship? And they were open to it. And then I co-directed the film with Manon, my wife, and we started talking about the idea of what would this be for us together to co-direct this film, one artist couple making a film about another artist couple. And soon enough, the four of us all met and hit it off, and within a few months we were living with Maggie and Joel in their home. And which is, whenever we were filming, we would live under the same roof for the space of just over a year of making the film. So it provided the most, incredible kind of intimacy and respect and trust between the four of us.
You mentioned there, like it's one artist couple, it's sort of documenting another artist couple. To what extent did you sort of see yourselves and your future as a couple through them?
Hugely. We have a lot in common with Maggie and Joel, and we really related to their sensibilities, to their outlook, and most of all, I wish Manon was here to be able to answer it as well, but speaking for both of us, I think that individually we both saw a kind of projection into the future. What's it like to be in your 70s and 80s, still in love, still communicating, still vital, still loving each other, with the kind of open capacity to grow each day. So for us it was a kind of, for our personal, emotional reasons, it felt like a kind of projection into the future, but through the lens of two other people.
It did, you mentioned there as well, the place in their lives that they're at. And I think that very early in the film, no spoilers by the way, but early in the film, Maggie and Joel are sort of listing off the major moments from their lives, and it becomes immediately clear sort of how much they've been through individually, how they've loved and lost and their ups and downs. But they also say that they're committed to resolving any issues between them as a couple, because there's limited time left to do that. So I think this time that you've caught them at is such a fascinating time to meet a couple. They've lived long enough to have experienced so much and learned so much about themselves, but there's also this awareness of this finite time together that's left. So there's still this willingness to learn more and grow more together.
Yeah, I mean, if you really pay attention to life, it goes to show you that it's unpredictable. And, the carpe diem philosophy is really important. We never know what's around the corner. And these people really take that seriously. And that's a really strong message that Manon and I took on board as well, not just from the film, but from living with these people, is that life is unexpected. And so if you feel the emotional need to make some kind of a change, or there's something inside of you but is kind of dormant and you're not paying it too much attention because you've got to do the whatever, no, now's the time. Now's the time.
And that, living with them must have been such an incredible experience. I haven't heard too many sort of setups for a film, a documentary before that are like this one. Spending probably every other day living with them over the course of a year. What are the challenges and the sort of benefits that come from that closeness? Because I'd imagine how could you be sure that you weren't influencing their space and sort of influencing the way they interacted with each other and sort of changing things, making things unnatural?
We kept a really open dialogue from the start, and we did have our own bedroom. But I think each evening, if we weren't filming, the four of us would talk. We'd talk about what's been going on during the day, what's happening in Maggie and Joel's lives, and I think this kind of communication really was the thing that knitted the whole experience together for all of us. And I think that in that way we both became part of their lives, but also became invisible to their lives, which in an observational documentary is important. And so, the fact that we were just cohabiting with them really just, I think, very quickly got us to a space of comfort and trust that was able to provide for all of us a kind of very naturalistic reality, so that they could get on with their lives and we could quietly do our thing, and then we would talk.
So did that trust come from the start? The level of intimacy and openness that you're going to see in this film is astounding, honestly. It's you'd hear in the blurb that it's an intimate portrayal of a relationship, but you really do see some of the most, intense and open and personal conversations you could imagine. Did that trust and openness come from the start? I'm fascinated with how two people could open up to that extent and be themselves to that extent in front of the camera. Yeah,
it did. I think there was a lot of, I think that Maggie and Joel, they identified with us a lot, and I think that, if you see yourself in someone else, it's a great way of trusting that person. If there's a kind of mirrored sensibility. And, the film, we also started making the film at the end, sort of the tail end of the pandemic, when everyone was so desperate for sort of human communication and contact. And I think that having just lived isolated in their home in Tuscany, which you'll see, and suddenly having these two people arrive on the scene also gave them a boost of energy and willingness to kind of open up. It's very ephemeral and almost impossible to talk about trust because it's really just a feeling.
But you think that, because we talked about how you saw yourselves in them, so you think that was mirrored? You think they saw something of themselves in you as well?
Yeah, I do. You know, Maggie and Joel met later on in life and weren't the ages that Manon and I are when they met, but I think that there was a kind of, I mean, it defies age, essentially, the whole thing, but I think that there was I think they enjoyed seeing the kind of younger relationship and romance in us. And we have a lot in common. I mean, we talk in similar ways, we have very similar interests, you know. Maggie and Joel, their sort of sensibilities are so aligned with ours that it just felt really natural. I think it's a completely unique combination. Had any one of the four of us been a different person, it would have been a very different situation.
And we talked about that outside as well just now, because, you know, on the outside, this is a pair of directors who are a couple watching another couple, and there's sort of that glass window between you and them. You're observing them, but actually, the more you watch the film and the more you hear about this background of, you know, a couple documenting a couple, it's sort of a two-way glass as well. It's sort of an interaction both ways on a very constant basis, especially for that amount of time that you spent living together.
Yeah, it is. But you know, I hope that that for all of you, it will be the same as it was for us, which is when you're, you know, closely kind of spending time with another couple, you sort of drape your own life experiences onto them and kind of identify with the unique situations that they're going through the kind of larger universal things that are relevant to you. So it's very inspiring for us to kind of watch them and be with them.
And you ended up factoring in a lot of their output as creatives, as artists into the film, didn't you? Like in terms of Joel's sort of aesthetic as an artist, in terms of Maggie's output as well. Like can you talk a bit about how you brought them and their creative output into the film?
Yeah, so the film language really sort of pays homage to Maggie and Joel's artistry. The soundtrack to the film, which was composed by a composer called Diogo Strauss, takes direct inspiration from Maggie's piano compositions, which you'll hear throughout the film. And in the same way, the framing of the film and the kind of photography at large was inspired by Joel's street photography. And in street photography, traditionally, the kind of street photography that I'm interested in anyway, what's going on the edges of the frame is just as significant as what's happening in the middle. And when you give yourself those kinds of rules, you apply the rules of street photography onto documentary filmmaking. All of a sudden you've got a really unique kind of rule book to be working from. And as a street photographer, I'm very used to packing frames with, you know, meaning in a very spontaneous way. So I'm trying to think about how to talk about this without spoiling it too much. I'll keep it short, that's how. You can fill a frame with significance and allow audiences to kind of find their way around it. And, you know, this film, I think, is about the art of spontaneous, finding spontaneous meaning behind something, and also the art of anticipation, hoping that the frame that you find will kind of coalesce with the content of reality as it unfolds.
That is something I want to talk about more, because, I wish you'd seen the film, because this would make a lot more sense, but so many of the frames in this film are just perfectly choreographed and framed. It's, you know, we talked about it outside almost being like a sort of Renaissance art piece. You know, you've got this incredible house that they live in, and the two people sort of either side of a bed or something else in the house, and then it's all so perfectly set up, but then what's happening in the frame is not at all set up. You know, you're hearing very raw conversations between these two people. I'm curious sort of how how can you create something so perfect aesthetically? You imagine a fly on the wall documentary is so often a camera sort of shaking around and trying to get into the space of the room, but it's not like this in this film. How do you create that sort of perfect setup with such a raw, natural conversation happening within it?
Firstly, living with them goes a long way, because you on a daily basis you observe people's routines, the ways that they live their life. How do people enter spaces? And so just the pure kind of taking notice really goes a long way. And I mean, you find a frame and try to anticipate the meaning of a space before it's happened. So it's a very strange kind of projection of what might be, and sometimes it works out and sometimes it doesn't. In this documentary, the whole film is shot with the camera on a tripod, and traditionally, yes, the camera kind of constantly moves around, and so by sort of forming the proscenium arch of the kind of theatrical space, if you like, and then just letting daily life unfold. It's amazing what happens in a space naturally, and we would keep the cameras rolling. Sometimes we'd be in the room, sometimes we wouldn't, and it was really a case of spending time watching and collecting and quietly working out what worked and what didn't, and slowly adding to the process.
And that intimacy that we see come through from this couple in the film, I'd imagine it must be so confronting for them to watch that back. Imagine watching an argument between you and your partner, or you and a parent, back on screen. I've struggled with that at least. But that I've read that they've watched it now 6 times together since, maybe it's more now. That might have been an old article as well. And how that they're eager to grow and improve the way they are with one another based on watching it each time. And I feel like that's such an amazing approach to life from both of them, because you have a couple that's been together for so long and they're in sort of the twilight years of their life, but then they're not only open to changing and evolving the way they love each other, but actually actively seeking that out. I mean, I just feel like, do you think that's a unique sort of approach for a couple that's been together that long? It felt like that to me, but I've been single for years, so...
Want to make a film? No. I think that Maggie and Joel's communication is totally remarkable, for sure. And I don't know what's unique and what isn't, because we're not there yet in our lives, and it's very rare, I think, to get exposed to these levels of intimacy. Let's say you see your parents' friends or older family members, you see them in a kind of social setting where everyone's playing nice. I think that, talking to Maggie and Joel and their friends about the ways that they live their life, I think it is pretty unique, and I think it's certainly something that as human beings we could all aim towards, because keeping a communicative dialogue and openness about where you're at and how you feel about a relationship is really the only way that you can respectfully move forward and not kind of hide things away.
And in that vein, what did you learn about your relationship through the process of making this?
That it takes constant communication, and also that no matter how old you are, there is always room for growth and expansion, that life is not over until the day that you die. And I think that there's this kind of impression that older people stop progressing or stop growing, but actually as human beings we have the capacity to keep unfolding each day, to keep learning, to keep challenging ourselves, to keep improving ourselves, and that's really inspiring. That's really inspiring to see an older couple who still fearlessly are kind of willing to go there.
Thank you. I did actually have another question, but I think that's such a lovely way to close. I think it's time to start the film now, so yeah, thank you.